It's time to go inside the Birds in Focus podcast, a Philly Sports Network show with your host, Nick Faria.
Welcome inside the Birds in Focus podcast, episode 6 of the Birds in Focus podcast, where the birds are the focus. Hi, everybody. I'm Nick Faria, joined today by one of my good friends, Jack Riccio. He's going to be on with us throughout the entirety of the show. We got a lot of great topics to talk about. We're going to talk about the winners and losers of the draft. Jack has to give his opinions on who was the biggest winner and who was the biggest loser, as well as some of the latest news that have happened. The Dallas Cowboys have had a busy offseason, but did they do enough to get past Philadelphia in a very crowded NFC East? And, of course, we'll talk about Jalen Hurts and what happens with Carson Wentz. So with that being said, Jack, welcome back to the Birds in Focus podcast. This is your second time coming on, right?
Yes. Glad to be back. Excited.
We have a lot to get to today. So
second quarantine show.
It's the second quarantine show. Obviously, everyone trying to stay safe. It looks like a lot of different states are opening up. So it looks like we could be seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Still a long way to go, though. But we'll see what happens with that. So, Jack, I want to ask you, where do you want to start today? Because a lot of news has happened. The draft happened last week. We had a show for that. We had Ed Kratz come on from Sports Illustrated. He gave his views on the Eagles draft. We didn't really touch on the entirety of the NFL. Do you want to start there?
Yeah, let's do it. Cool. I mean, I'm just sort of coping with the loss of Andy Dalton in free agency. That was tough to see. That they got the Cowboys ended up swiping him from the Patriots. So,
and we'll get to that in just a little bit.
Otherwise, yeah, I'm feeling good about the league. Good for them. You know, as a New England fan, I'm just kind of a spectator this year, assuming it even happens. So, yeah, here we go.
And just to preface that for our viewers, yes, this is the Birds in Focus podcast, and we do have an enemy in the midst. Jack is a Patriots
fan. The New England perspective.
A different perspective, and that's why we love this. The Birds are the focus.
Dynasty. Yeah.
The Birds are the focus, but we need those independent thought processes as well, and going on and talking about and focusing on the rest of the NFL as well. So I'm glad to have you on, Jack. So let's talk about this draft. The draft's now a week ago, and the week passed. A lot of teams have some clarity. I think people that didn't like the Philadelphia Eagles draft have really opened up to it since then. And those that, sometimes those that hate it might hate it even more. But at this point, we can talk about some of the winners and losers of the draft and even of the offseason. Now, Jack, if I were to come up to you right now, spot on, and say who was the biggest winner of the 2020 NFL draft, who would your pick be?
Yeah, it's tough to pick a number one team here. I think it was a pretty good draft this year, and I think a lot of GMs, we'll say about half the league, made the right decisions, especially in the early rounds. There wasn't a whole lot of mid-round talent, in my opinion, especially defensively. So it came down to a lot of I think a lot of GMs made tough decisions in terms of giving up what they wanted for a certain position defensively in order to get that kind of firepower to give their teams an advantage. I think an example of that would be the Broncos. So I really like their draft picks, especially Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler, giving a couple of weapons to that offense coming into the 2020 season. And I mean, Drew Lock's reaction really kind of sums it up. We've got some stallions, he says, following the draft. And he's right. I mean, Jeudy is a really, really strong deep ball receiver, can go up with the 50-50 balls. And KJ Hamler, a lot of speed, and he can move the chains, get like the short yard situations squared away. So important in the NFL are those kind of short yards, third down conversions. And I think he could be a real asset in converting those consistently.
So, and I'll agree with you there on Denver being a big winner, and I'll even include Drew Lock in that as well. Drew Lock had a very good end of the season when he was named the starter over Joe Flacco in Denver. I think the Broncos are going to be a very interesting team to look at. Vic Fangio has really developed a pretty solid unit and a pretty solid roster to look at and compete with the Chiefs in the AFC West. I don't think they're there yet to beat the Chiefs and surpass them, but that's a good team to maybe make a wild card run and see where they can go in the postseason. Do you have any other winners, though, in the draft?
Yeah, obviously the Cowboys, but I'll kind of let you talk about them more. I'll let you talk about the NFC East a little bit more than I will. But Cowboys, I'll say, surprised me. I think with Jerry Jones, I think it was a scoop. I don't know if this was confirmed, but saying for his scouts to stay out of his business, basically. Don't text him, don't call him, don't bother him during the draft. But then he goes out and picks CeeDee Lamb, which I think is an excellent pick. And now with the addition of Andy Dalton, there's going to be a little bit of competition at the quarterback position, I think, and that could make it interesting, sort of light a fire under his guys to perform after a very disappointing 2019 campaign. But I'll say another team that I liked were the Bengals, and looking like an SEC team out there. They picked up Joe Burrow and T. Higgins in the first and second round, respectively. Joe Burrow, I am so excited about Burrow. Just his ability to make decisions, make tough throws. He's got a cannon. He's accurate. He's the complete package. He's probably the best quarterback, at least prospect, that I think we've seen since probably the whole probably one of the best in the decade. I think at least.
Andrew Luck.
I think we'll have to see. It's going to be I think as a he's right up there. He's right up there with Luck as a prospect, and we all know what happened with Luck. And while he did have a good career, it just was cut short. And so maybe Burrow can sort of solidify his legacy as someone who's more consistent, stays out of injury trouble. But that just depends on who the Bengals can sort of scrounge up for protection on that offensive line, which hasn't been too impressive. But I will say I love T. Higgins as well. Probably he's likely my favorite receiver in this draft, just because I think he can make a lot of big plays. He can do a lot for a franchise. You can build around him. He's a deep ball receiver, and I think he'll mesh with Burrow really well. I think they both came from blue bloods in college, and they were both highly touted. They're used to the lights, they're used to the flashing cameras, and they're used to the hype, and they can perform, regardless. They're not going to be sort of phased by being on a higher stage, on the big stage in the NFL. So I think they can make an impact a lot sooner than a lot of these other prospects, especially in for the Bengals, whose offense kind of struggled last year. And I think it's going to be sort of a vacuum in the AFC North. Sans the Ravens, I think the Steelers and
the Browns.
Steelers. Steelers and Browns. They have prospects, but they're sort of in the same position as the Bengals, in my opinion. So it's sort of the Steelers trying to find a good replacement for Roethlisberger, and sort of the offensive pieces they lost in the last few years, and the Browns are just the Browns. So I think the Bengals could really have success in that division in the coming years, possibly lock in a wild card spot either this season or next with these guys. So I'm excited about that.
If I were to go my biggest winners of the draft, I think the New York Jets had a fantastic draft. Joe Douglas, who left the Philadelphia Eagles organization last offseason, I thought he had a great first draft as general manager of the New York Jets. You look at getting Mekhi Becton, who probably has the highest ceiling of any of the rookie left tackles. I thought he was a great selection. And the Jets got weapon after weapon, offensively and defensively. They solidified the offensive line. They did exactly what this team needed. They filled every need. I think the Jets are going to be a lot better this year than a lot of people think because of the draft they had with Joe Douglas. If I were to give another winner, though, outside of the Cowboys and the Broncos, which I do completely agree with you that those are winners, if I were to go for another winner, it's got to be Tampa Bay. You sign Tom Brady, you talk Rob Gronkowski out of retirement, you get him. But the biggest need that team had going into this draft, defense was above average. I don't think they're a top 5 defense, but they're still good enough to solidify and make a bunch of stops and win games. The offense is obviously good enough. There's plenty of weapons. I personally think there's a little too many weapons because there's going to be some complaints later on in the year about not getting the ball. But at the same time, you have plenty of weapons. There's not really much to worry about. All they needed to do was solidify the offensive line, and they did that. We talk about offensive linemen, and Tristan Wirfs, is he the best left tackle prospect? No. But he's a first-round talent. He's definitely a Pro Bowl caliber tackle, and he's going to help Brady and the Tampa Bay offense go into a second gear that they might not have been able to if they did not solidify the offensive line help. So if I were to go maybe 4 winners, it's got to be the Broncos, the Cowboys, the Jets, and the Buccaneers. I think the 3 of the biggest losers, though, and if I can transition to that, the biggest losers to me are very simple. Green Bay, obviously the worst one. That draft was porous. For a team that just made the NFC title game, it's a really bad draft because that Rodgers got you to the NFC title game, and then instead of getting other receivers like Philadelphia did and the replacement for Aaron Rodgers, they said, no, we're going to get the replacement and we're just going to kick him out into the road. It made no sense to me. Green Bay is a big loser, and I think Atlanta and Oakland, or Las Vegas, if you will now, both did not hit on their first-round picks. I think they reached for their corners, A.J. Terrell being one of them, and I don't like the draft that they had. I think they're going to rue they're going to rue the day that happened on day one because they weren't really able to recover for the rest of the draft.
Just so I make sure I understand you correctly, are you saying that by drafting Jordan Love, they're kicking Aaron Rodgers to the curb? Did I hear that right?
No, not just that. I think if you were to select Jordan Love in the first round, that would be okay, but you would have to solidify it with other receivers. This was a very deep receiver class. And to compare it to Philadelphia, they solidified the receiving core in the draft. They traded for Marquise Goodwin. They got John Hightower, very good fifth-round prospect, a lot of upside. Jalen Reagor, who a lot of people are talking about as he might have an incredibly high ceiling. He might have a low floor, but he might have an incredibly high ceiling because of what he's able to do on the field, and he's a better fit for the offense. But the Eagles solidified their receiving core, which helped Carson Wentz. They helped him also by getting a lot of solid offensive line depth. But for the Packers, they didn't really do that. They drafted a quarterback, and then the next guy they got was a bruising running back in Jonathan Taylor. They didn't help themselves at
A.J.
all.
Dillon.
A.J. Dillon, excuse me, thank you. I compare those two because they're both power backs. But what is Dillon going to do that's going to help Aaron Rodgers right now?
Well, all right, that kind of brings me to my point about the Packers. So I'll get into my losers later. I did have a lot prepared for the Packers, but I don't know if I agree it's the obvious pick as the worst draft. I don't know if it's how obvious it is, depending on what perspective you want to use. Yeah, for short-term success, grabbing guys who can help you now, like you said, solidify the receiving core, something they haven't done for Aaron Rodgers in his entire career. I actually read a stat, and I haven't affirmed it yet, but I saw something like a quick little tweet, I think. It said that Aaron Rodgers has thrown 1 touchdown pass to a first-round pick, and it's Mercedes Lewis.
Yep.
Yeah.
The rest of them are round picks.
It's ridiculous. I mean, if you look at all the other MVP level quarterbacks in the league in the last 2 decades, the numbers are well over 20 and 30. So it's amazing. I always thought of Tom Brady as someone who sort of elevated the talent of lesser receivers around him, but I never really gave that kind of credit to Rodgers as it should have been. I didn't realize. I always realized that he didn't have the top tier talent, but I didn't realize that they really never gave him a first round pick or never gave him that much receiving, just raw talent in the receiving core. But that said, I think what Matt LaFleur is doing, he needs to take control of not just the X's and O's, but the Jimmys and Joes, the personnel. He needs to make this his own team. And he's sort of following in the footsteps of the type of coaches, the type of schemes we've seen in Green Bay for really the past 30 years. I think hallmarked by Mike Holmgren's tenure, and then Mike Sherman. And I think people forget a lot about Mike Sherman here when he had Brett Favre really in his prime. Yeah, there were times Brett Favre was consistently leading the league in touchdown passes. but there were a couple seasons where they had a top 5 rushing offense too, and it was the zone blocking scheme with that sort of physical running back that really got him to that point and made him a playoff team. I think that's the way in which LaFleur is thinking here. I think in the short term, you're right, it doesn't look good, but I think he's thinking 3 years out, 5 years out. He's creating a blueprint. He's creating something, a foundation for long-term stability. I think in trying to keep that sort of West Coast base in Green Bay and with the zone blocking scheme. And I think they've lost that. They sort of wanted, I think the Packers have always gone for that kind of physical power back, and they really had a hard time really drafting one all decade. But A.J. Dillon, I think, has a lot of upside. It's just a matter of, is he fast enough to be, he's definitely not as good as a Derrick Henry, but does he have the quickness to be an effective running back in that system? He definitely has physicality, but we're going to have to see how he develops his speed. That is kind of an issue coming out of this draft. But otherwise, they draft 3 interior linemen, 3 of which I kind of like to see. I always like seeing young prospects on the offensive line. That's their motor. That's where the offense really gets started. So I like to see that. And Stepaniak, one of them, I know he played tackle. I think he came out of the draft as a tackle, but he played 10 games at right guard his senior year. So he's really looking to solidify the running game first, and he might branch out to the passing game later on. So that's sort of my thought about the draft in a vacuum. I think he's just thinking medium to long term with his prospects, not in the short term necessarily.
Let me ask you 2 questions about that, Jack, though, about Aaron Rodgers. Knowing now that Aaron has never been given the talent that maybe, say, a Tom Brady or a Peyton Manning or Drew Brees has been given, do you hold Rodgers in a little bit more of a lighter side now? Does he rank higher among the all-time greats because of that now? Or that's
a different discussion. If we're talking about the draft, and sure, whatever. But if we're going back to the greatest quarterbacks of all time, we should have had this discussion whenever we recorded last, like 3 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm. No, but that was before the draft, after they did this, and after that came to light.
I do give him I definitely give him more credit. I don't think I realized that. I guess they didn't really see the need for it in Green Bay. They sort of said, hey, look, Rodgers can just make magic happen. He can throw those 60-yard bombs for Hail Marys, whatever. Like, this guy can do everything. He can run. He can throw the ball. We're going to stick to our system. We're going to stick to the West Coast. We roll the quarterback out. We throw the ball deep. It doesn't work. We go back to the zone blocking scheme. So it kind of just didn't. Yeah, I think they didn't really give him a lot of help. I don't know how vocal Rodgers was about that either. I know some quarterbacks, I think Brady is, at least internally, is pretty vocal about his needs in the offense. I don't know if Rodgers was the same. I know they've had
absolutely
him in the locker room. Yeah, it probably was, but I know there's been some question about his locker room presence too. So, are they giving him a lot of help, or do they see him as a sort of like just kind of a complainer? And they're like, no, this is the GMs kind of want it to go a different direction. So, that said, I do give him a lot of credit for what he's had to work with. But I don't know. I don't agree that the NFC North was that difficult as a whole in his career. The Packers were pretty much dominated that for most of his tenure, with a couple exceptions. I think the Lions had a playoff run with Stafford that one time with
three out of 4
Johnson, yeah. And then the Bears, when they had the defense, the defense, they had that one playoff run too. And then the Vikings, when they got, when they started to, again, with the defensive talent on that team too, they got better at the latter half of the decade, but for the most part, the Packers were always going to win they're always the best team in the NFC North. So Rodgers always had a pretty good path into the playoffs, but the lack of playoff success perhaps had to do with the lack of talent in his receiving core. That's sort of what I'm getting at.
So let's transition now. We've talked about the NFL landscape a bunch. Now let's transition more to the Eagles and the NFC East, because I am interested about this. You were talking to me when the Eagles drafted Hurts about what they were going to do. Now, a week after, do you think that the Eagles made the right pick with Jalen Hurts?
I'm not sure. I thought it was pretty. It was at first I thought it was funny. Like I think a lot of people are just kind of cracking jokes about it, and it's a kind of a confusing pick. I understand that Carson Wentz could be considered injury prone, kind of. I mean, maybe that's the sort of the angle. They're like, okay, well, look, when Wentz goes down, or if Wentz goes down, who's our guy? Who's our next guy? It used to be Nick Foles. He's been gone for a little while, so we kind of need that next guy up. And I thought it was an interesting parallel, like what the Saints do with Taysom Hill down in New Orleans. With you still have Drew Brees as the starting quarterback. Taysom Hill sometimes lines up in the slot. He could play like kind of like a tight end / slot receiver, and then he could play quarterback sometimes, which I think is kind of interesting. And I think Peterson can be creative with this, having these two sort of quarterbacks. And I don't know, Jalen Hurts isn't going to be like he doesn't light it up. I don't think he's a blue chip prospect in any sense. I think he's probably one of the more average quarterbacks come out of this class, and but they can still make use out of him. And if things don't go well, you still have a young quarterback to trade. So I think I would just keep an eye on his salary too, not make sure you don't overpay him, but if you use him properly and creatively in that scheme, maybe they can make something work. But but going back to Taysom Hill, Drew Brees missed almost half the season this past year, so that really helped. It really helped having him, and I think Bridgewater for a little while too. So it does help to have a good backing quarterback. It's really important.
See, here's my point to this, and I'll say this: you're not a Cowboys fan, so I'm not going to hold too much stock into this. But a lot when Hurts was drafted, a lot of NFL people that were defending the pick basically said your most important position is your quarterback. The second most important position is the backup quarterback, because if the starter goes down, if you have a great team around you and you have an average to below average quarterback, you can succeed. You can go to the Super Bowl. You can win the Super Bowl. The case of the 2017 Eagles, where that team and roster was absolutely loaded, and all Nick Foles had to do was play average, and they would have won and gotten to the Super Bowl. He played above average, and that team went from good to great without Carson Wentz, even though when Wentz was there, they were still a great football team. So the backup quarterback to me only has to be average. If Jalen Hurts is average, if Wentz goes down for a week, you have that protection. But I do want to compare this move to a move that was made. We're airing this show on Monday, so that'll be on Saturday. So 2 days ago, when the Eagles and Cowboy fans everywhere were laughing about the fact that Jalen Hurts is coming for Carson Wentz's spot, the Dallas Cowboys made a surprise move in signing Andy Dalton, who was released by the Cincinnati Bengals, a 1-year, $3 million deal, an incentive-based contract that can go as high as $7 million total in guarantees. So the Cowboys sign a proven veteran, a guy who has won the AFC North, a guy who has made the playoffs 5 times, and is a 3-time Pro Bowl quarterback. To me, and Jack, I'll ask for your opinion here, but to me, the Cowboys signing Andy Dalton says more about what the Cowboys think of Dak Prescott and their contract dispute than the Eagles drafting Jalen Hurts and what that says about Carson Wentz.
Okay, I see. So you're saying there's no parallel here. Like, it's not the Eagles drafting Hurts is not the equivalent of the Cowboys signing Dalton.
I say that it means more to Dak Prescott, them signing Andy Dalton, than the Jalen Hurts selection means to Carson Wentz.
Right.
So what do you think?
I agree with that. Again, I don't know if I would have taken Hurts. If I'm the Eagles, I don't know if I'm taking Hurts in the second round. I don't know if I agree with that specifically, but yeah, I see your point, and I agree with that. The Cowboys signing Dalton is more significant. It's more of a slight towards what's his name? Dang it! Sorry, Dak Prescott. Thank you. I'm not good with names today. I think that's more of a slight towards Prescott. I wouldn't be worried if I was Wentz. I think it's kind of a blessing in disguise. And hey, like it's someone you can trust behind you. You don't put that pressure on yourself to really to really light it up. I think Carson Wentz was feeling the pressure last year, and not just in a metaphorical sense, but also quite literally when he was, he's being rushed, felt like every other play. So he makes throws that you couldn't even imagine. They were like Madden throws. I think of the one against the Patriots last year, the Aguilar, should have caught it in the end zone, ridiculous, like extended the play. I think he can kind of take it easy now a little bit more, because he doesn't feel he needs to front load all of the production. You can say, like, look, I can trust my defense a little more. If I get in trouble, I'm not going to scramble and keep extending the play, because the more he does that, the more of a chance he goes out and gets hurt. So if he feels better about who's behind him, and you said the receiving core, you can trust his receivers more, you can trust his defense and his backup. You could just sort of take things in stride a little bit more during the game. Put up the numbers, go hard when he needs to at certain points. But if something bad were to happen, it could feel a little bit better about who's backing him up. So that is important too. And so same with the coaching staff in the front office. So things do go wrong. But like I said, he could just focus on protecting himself a little more. That's all. That's really what I'm getting at.
But if I'm going to circle this back to the Andy Dalton signing, if I'm looking at and you look at the two comparisons, the Eagles gave Wentz a $100 million contract 2 summers ago. So they gave him his money, and Nick Foles is gone, and now the contract starts. I think he's going to be averaging close to $32 million throughout the next 4 years of his deal. So you look at the contract of what Carson Wentz has. He's won the division twice. He was an MVP caliber player in 2017, and he won with 5 practice squad players playing in key positions throughout last season. So you look at it and say, okay, well, signing Hurts and drafting Hurts basically says he's the insurance policy if Carson Wentz goes down, and he adds great value if we want to trade him in 2 or 3 years, a la a Jimmy Garoppolo with Tom Brady. The difference with this Andy Dalton pick is here. Dak Prescott is playing under the franchise tag. He's not signed to a long-term deal. So to me, the longer this goes, this holdout of Dak Prescott, because he's already said that he's not showing up to Dallas minicamp unless there's a new deal outside of the franchise tag. And Jerry Jones has not budged. Dak wants $40 million. Jerry says he's giving him $35. He wants to be the highest paid quarterback in the NFL, and hell with everyone else who thinks differently. But to me, if he doesn't sign this tender, Andy Dalton comes in. Now, this is a guy, like I said, he's been to the playoffs multiple times. He hasn't won a playoff game, but to lead the Cincinnati Bengals to their most successful run in the past 40 years is still very impressive. He, at one point, people forget, the Bengals were 8-0 at one point, I believe, and I'm trying to remember, I think 2015, 2014. That was a very good Cincinnati Bengals roster that just couldn't get over the hump of winning a playoff game. That's a huge difference as opposed to drafting a quarterback. If the Cowboys drafted Jalen Hurts, and it was reversed, if the Cowboys drafted Jalen Hurts, that's we're protecting Dak in case he gets hurt, in case everything else happens, and in case he doesn't sign his deal, we have this here. Andy Dalton signed a very cheap 1-year deal. It's not like he went for $15 million. He went for $3 million. And he said, it's okay, I'll back up Dak. But if Dak doesn't show up or doesn't produce, this is a massive quarterback controversy that you're going to have in Dallas. Because if Dak doesn't produce, and we have to remember something here, and I've said this before, the Cowboys added CeeDee Lamb. Was that a need for the team last season? Absolutely not. Because the receiving core was already bolstered. You had Gallup, you had Cooper, you had Ezekiel Elliott, and Blake Jarwin. Those were already good weapons. Now you add a slot receiver that can go for 1,000 yards, and you say, okay, it's impossible now for Dak Prescott not to win the division or not to throw for 5,000 yards and not to be leading the league in passing. This is a big year for Dak, and the more he sits out with this controversy in his contract, the worse it's going to get. With Carson Wentz, on the other hand, he is a guy, he's produced, not winning the games that Dak did under the same talent, but he's won the same amount of division titles. He has been an MVP candidate. He's the best quarterback in the red zone statistically over the last 4 years. In the red zone, there's not a quarterback better from a touchdown to interception ratio. And the deal with Andy Dalton, I think, says more about what the Cowboys think of Dak than what the Eagles think of Carson Wentz by drafting Jalen Hurts. And I want to bring up an extra point here, because I do want your opinion on this. Andy Dalton, very good starting quarterback, not great, but good starting quarterback, average to above average quarterback. Cam Newton is still unsigned. And he's already said today in the last couple of days that he's not going to be a backup. He wants to be a starter, and he'll wait for an opening to come up a la Randall Cunningham back in the day in the 90s. Do you think, and I'll even bring Jameis Winston into this conversation, do you think the Cowboys should have taken a flyer on Cam over Dalton?
No. I mean, I think there are a couple of things that come to mind here. With the installation of McCarthy, right? Who is McCarthy going to succeed with more? The answer, you could make a case for Cam Newton and say that, look, Newton's mobile. He's impossible to bring down. He is a cannon. Like, that's kind of who he was working with in Green Bay. But you have to remember that things didn't go well in Green Bay towards the end of McCarthy's tenure. So, all right, let's get someone like Andy Dalton, a good old boy. He doesn't come with all of the frills and the pomp and the big contract. I don't think Cam Newton, first of all, would have signed for $3 million. Right? I don't think that's
there's no way. There's no way.
And he's kind of going from the NFC South, the NFC East, and filling in just taking on a big role as a Cowboys quarterback. It's a lot of pressure there, and he hasn't really. What have we seen from Newton in the last couple of years, really, with his injuries? And I think you're taking a bigger risk with Newton, and you're paying more money for him, and you're paying for really the brand name and perhaps not the production you'd get out of a Dalton. But there's the other side of it, is that what if Cam Newton comes out this season and is an absolute monster? So it's really just an unknown. I think there is one certainty, is that the Cowboys are not willing to take a risk on the quarterback position. The higher you're paying for it, the bigger risk you're taking. The bigger risk you're taking of having to give up talent and not planning for the long-term sustainable success, because we've seen it over and over again. The win now mentality overall is not the direction that the front office should be going in. For any NFL organization, it usually falls flat. It turns out it's really hard to win the playoffs. So you need to have a team that's not just built to make it to the playoffs in one season. You need something that's built for several seasons, and that means, like you said, building around a guy, building a great team around one guy. And to go back to the point of a backup quarterback succeeding with a great roster, let's say Andy Dalton, he's probably as good as a backup, but he'd find success in Dallas. So that's that, and I guess for his value too, that's who I would take as well. I think Cam Newton, his price tag would be a lot higher for probably similar production. And who knows? I mean, he might be a little bit better, but does he stick around in Dallas? Does it work out? And does he want more money when after one or two seasons? So, and if the answer is yes, then you have to give up other talent around him. And we have the problem with losing that sustained success, or having the chance of losing sustained success.
So Jack, we have about 10 minutes left on today's show. So I want to bring this and center this back to the Eagles, if you will. Eagles had a busy offseason, and I made the point on draft night and on day 3 when Howie Roseman had steal after steal after steal in the draft. on day 3, that the Eagles roster, when healthy, was good enough at that moment to win the division. They were already a playoff caliber team before the draft. The question was, did they add enough pieces in the offseason and in free agency to become more than just a playoff caliber team and become a championship caliber team? To me, I look at this team right now and I say, okay, depending on the schedule, they're going to have a tougher schedule, but there's no excuse to not win the division. There's no excuse not to make a deep playoff run with the talent around them. The addition of Darius Slay, the addition, of Nickel Roby-Coleman, the slot corner from LA, who was a very good slot corner, adding in Javon Hargrave, adding in the receivers and the depth along the offensive line. I think this is a team good enough to make it to the postseason and make a loud out in the postseason. They're going to be a very tough team to beat. But in your mind, speaking as a different fan of the team, do you have that same thought process?
Oh, for sure. Sorry, where did they sign I'm trying to look at the list here. Where did they sign a lineman? Who is it?
So Javon Hargrave was the interior defensive lineman.
Yep. They said offensive line too. Did they sign a tackle or a guard or something like that?
They drafted 2.
Oh, draft. Okay, so I just want to make sure I'm on the same page. So
Nope, all good.
The comparison is draft picks and free agent signings?
Yes.
Okay, I see. Yeah, for sure. I think the front office, on the whole, although there were a few interesting picks, but like you said, yeah, they did it. They got all of the pieces they needed. They actually picked up another quarterback in free agency, interestingly enough. So now they have 2 quarterbacks, new ones coming to the team.
Yeah,
and Sutton and Hurts. So sort of creating maybe like a little bit of maybe like not a farm system, but kind of that, going to QB
the quarterback
training.
factory.
Yeah, quarterback factory. Yeah, and that's not And I, as a New England fan, that is exactly what the Patriots are. Is a quarterback factory, or at least was. Brady being there for so long, but look at the career Jimmy Garoppolo had. He just got to the Super Bowl this year, so. That's a great move by the Eagles to have that sort of to just add sort of fortify the depth, right? It starts with the depth. It starts with your team can go out and win 5 games start the season, but can they can they perform for the rest of the with an extra week in the mix or extra 2 weeks in the mix, excuse me. Depth is all important. So going out and backing up their defense in all facets, from the secondary to the D line. They got another linebacker in Jatavis Brown. It's a good time to be in Philadelphia, really, just because I think they made all the right decisions in terms of who's behind our starters, who's gonna be there. Who's going to be behind Javon Hargrave when it's week 15 and these guys are absolutely exhausted and have another 2 weeks and then an extra playoff game to deal with. So if they make the playoffs, so I think the extended season has the front office sort of scrambling to change their sort of mindsets, but I think the Eagles are ahead of the game here. And the name of the game is having depth, having that sort of backup that can get you through the whole of the season, even if it means not getting like the top talent or paying the big names to come on the stage. It's not going to matter as much as having 3 or 4 guys in a position that can go out and get it done. So I do like that sort of depth-oriented strategy in the offseason here.
You make a great point about the depth and what happens in being ahead of the curve, and that's where I bring the Jalen Hurts pick into this conversation. Because if you look at it, let's say the NFL extends their season over the next couple of years and they move it to a 17-game slate. You're going to want to sit your quarterback maybe for a week or 2 so that way he's fresh. You're going to want to have depth. The addition of Jalen Hurts allows you to do that because when you look at it, what's the biggest need that the Eagles had going into the draft? It was that wide receiver. And they answered that. They had depth along the offensive line. They drafted Jack Driscoll, and Prince Tagovailoa, who honestly I thought was one of the biggest steals of the draft. You add in Kavon Wallace and all these studs in the mid-round picks. So what are you going to do? You want the best available quarterback to sit behind Carson Wentz and just say, hey, I'm here if you get hurt, or I'm here if you need a week off, or you need someone else to throw in practice because you're hurt. It doesn't matter to me. To me, Howie Roseman is playing 3D chess with this move. The NFL goes to an extended schedule by saying, okay, the backup quarterback is going to be a massive commodity. And yes, the New Orleans Saints have an embargo on it right now, but we can still be the quarterback factory that we want. And I'll say this. To say that this team's a quarterback factory is a joke, and I thought that was one of the dumbest things that I heard from Howie that day. But the point is simple. We're going to have a quarterback. If another team wants it, we got to remember something here. This is the general manager that shipped Sam Bradford for a first-round pick with the Minnesota Vikings. People forget about that. He got a first-round pick for Sam Bradford because the Vikings were so desperate for a quarterback when Teddy Bridgewater went down. So you bring it, you let go of Bradford for a first. If Jalen Hurts even plays above average in one game, you can ship him off for a first or second and say, okay, we'll just draft another quarterback. We'll develop another quarterback. It'll be very interesting to see what the Eagles do. But it seems like the needs of the team weren't that big going into the draft outside of wide receiver. And Howie Roseman just said, this is the best player available. We're going to take the best player available, and we're going to groom him to be a guy that we can ship off to God knows where in a year or two.
And to that point, I also just want to mention that this is probably a historically talented wide receiver core, just specifically coming out of the 2020 NFL draft. And not just going beyond the names, I think we've talked about the significance of the quarterback position so much, but we also have to look at, I think the Eagles nailed it with the first pick in Jalen Reagor. And I think they're going to be able to use him and Hightower and Watkins. I think these are all guys who had a lot of competition at the top, but they're still able to get it done out there. In my opinion, the teams that needed a wide receiver and got him already succeeded in this draft. And I think that's what the Eagles really, like you said, the Eagles needed it. And this is great timing for this front office. So it wasn't a huge worry. You're not getting 4 or 5 receivers or whatever, like 3 or 4, and saying like, okay, we're going to let them compete. We'll see who gets we'll see who can get a contract out of this. You're saying, no, I'm going to invest in these guys. I know they're good. I know this is a really talented core. Let's focus on the rest of the positions. Let's focus on, again, fortifying the depth, getting another quarterback, creating that factory. And now the Eagles are crazy deep in a brand new NFL. And they're probably, it's just about you're only as good as the weakest link. And they have a heck of a lot of resources out there to really make them the strongest team. As a unit, as a whole, to compete in the 2020 season as it will be. The only thing I would be concerned about is just the level of competition in the NFC East. I think this is just beyond just the Cowboys, but the Giants could make noise. Like you said, the Redskins also had a good draft. So you got to watch out for those divisional games, that they're always these brutal contests, and you got to make sure that doesn't drain you or drag you down throughout the course of the season. So I'd say it's Eagles are well equipped, just a matter of execution and finding success in the NFC East. I don't know if there's no excuse for not winning the NFC East, but I would say at least a wild card spot, if not topping the division, if things don't work out in Dallas.
Yeah, and I'll rectify that, and I think you make the good point of the playoffs should be the moniker. Dallas is probably the number one competitor in this division, which is why I bring them up so many times, because you have to stay focused on your number one enemy. If you're the Patriots, last year you were worried about Buffalo, and you wanted to talk about Buffalo and what they were doing and see what they were doing every other week. So along those same lines, that, okay, same thing for the Eagles. You have to focus on the Cowboys, see what they were doing, and see where they go next and what happens there. Jack, before we sign off, do you have any final points or anything that you want to bring up as a final rant, if you will?
Yes and no. I think I would, as a Patriots fan, I should talk about the just frustrating that we passed up on Jordan Love, and I agree with it, and it's not Belichick's style. It's drafting a first round pick as a quarterback or second round, whatever it would have been. I think it would have been first round, but or second round, early in any case, early draft pick, picking up a quarterback is just not. It's not him. It's not who he is. He's all about defense. My problem is that I think, like I said in the beginning of the show, this is a pretty much average to below average defensive class in terms of prospects. I think we've seen better in the past. I think a lot of good players are either too young to get into the league, or they were taken last year as younger players. So he picked up Kyle Duggar out of Division II this season as a safety, and the rest is sort of names I didn't even recognize. So so Duggar's fine. He's got a lot of speed. He's gonna learn under the McCourty brothers and Harmon. Like, that's great. And I like that he's fortifying that secondary still. There's a period of time where he didn't care about the secondary, but now he does. That's awesome. I think this defense is still gonna be strong, and they have a lot of young talent on top of the veterans they still have on that team. And that's exciting for the Patriots, but you needed offense this year, and this was a good time to pick up some weapons, and you just did it. So, still a question mark. I think it's still going to be Stidham going into this year. We'll see what happens. But again, I think the prognosticators versus Belichick. Belichick has a better track record. So I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong in saying they had a poor draft. But it doesn't. I don't have a lot of confidence in a lot of the defensive talent in the class as a whole, and the fact that they took pretty much mostly defensive players. To me, it's disappointing.
And that is the final word from Jack Riccio, a rant about the New England Patriots. Gotta tell you, it's well deserved. A lot of questions coming out of Foxborough, a lot of questions coming out of what is going to happen with the post-Tom Brady era in New England, and a lot of questions still to come for the Philadelphia Eagles as we sign off on the Birds in Focus podcast in episode 6, talking about a wide array of topics surrounding the Green Bay Packers, the Dallas Cowboys, and, of course, our beloved Philadelphia Eagles. Jack, thanks so much for joining us here today.
Thanks for having me.
And I just want to sign off today. We'll see you all next week. Thanks for coming on the Birds in Focus podcast.
The views and opinions expressed on today's show are not reflective of the Philly Sports Network. Thanks for listening to the Birds in Focus podcast.